You know that feeling when you've got a new idea buzzing in your head, something you're itching to try, but then that little voice pipes up. What if it's terrible? What if it's just lame?
Yeah, definitely.
It's that hesitation before hitting start on something big, fueled by the fear of not measuring up right away.
Mm.
And if you're like us, always trying to learn and grow, that fear can be a real drag, making you feel stuck before you even begin.
It's like an anticipatory cringe, isn't it?
Mm.
We project this critical judgment onto our yet-to-be-realized efforts.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting is the disconnect between this very powerful feeling and the actual journey of how truly significant things come into existence.
Right.
They rarely emerge fully formed and perfect.
Exactly. And that's what we're digging into today. We've been looking at some fascinating ideas around this fear of making something lame. Our goal is to understand why we all wrestle with this, to see why that initial self-judgment is often way off base, and most importantly, to give you some practical ways to push past it and feel more confident about exploring those new horizons.
So we're essentially dissecting this very human experience, the fear of initial failure, using the insights from the material we've explored.
Mm-hmm.
It offers a really compelling perspective on, the roots of this fear and some tangible strategies for overcoming it.
Okay, so let's get into it. What really jumped out at me is just how universal this fear is.
Uh-huh.
It's not just us sitting here. It seems like almost anyone who steps outside their comfort zone and tries something new has this nagging feeling that their first attempts will be subpar.
Right. It's almost default.
But here's the kicker. So many groundbreaking achievements started out as something that, looking back, might seem pretty basic.
That's a fundamental point to grasp. Consider the early sketches of a revolutionary invention, or like the very first chords of a now classic song. They weren't polished masterpieces from day one. This fear can feel so strong, yet it often flies in the face of how creativity and innovation actually unfold through iteration and development.
Right. It's almost like we're holding up a freshly planted seed and demanding it produce a full-grown tree overnight.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the reasons for this, according to what we've been reading, is actually quite deep-rooted.
No.
It appears that as a species, we haven't really developed established ways of reacting to truly novel ideas. Because historically, big leaps in innovation were relatively infrequent until recent centuries.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
What's fascinating here is the idea that for the vast majority of human history, radical innovation was so uncommon that we didn't necessarily evolve societal norms or even individual mental frameworks for how to nurture these brand new, often awkward, and evil concepts.
So we default to what we know.
Kind of. We're almost instinctively applying the same standards we use for evaluating mature, established endeavors to these fragile, just-born ones.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, you're operating in uncharted territory, and your internal compass for judging novelty might not be fully calibrated. This understanding alone can take some pressure off those initial efforts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We're comparing apples and oranges, judging these early stage projects with the same critical eye we'd use for something that's much further down the line, or even something inherently less ambitious.
Exactly.
We're not really giving that initial learning and experimentation phase the space it needs.
And this is where the example of Silicon Valley provides such a valuable contrast.
Hmm.
It's presented as an environment where this dynamic is beginning to shift. The sources suggest that there, encountering a strange new idea from an unknown person is less likely to result in immediate dismissal.
Okay.
There seems to be a learned appreciation for the potential downsides of being too quick to judge.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The material talks about a sort of unwritten rule, or maybe a trick, in places like Silicon Valley. Instead of the default reaction being to pick apart all the reasons why a new idea won't work, there's a deliberate effort to flip that and actively look for reasons why it could work.
Right, the optimism factor.
Yeah. It even mentions the experience at Y Combinator, where this kind of inherent optimism becomes almost essential when you're constantly seeing a flood of unconventional proposals.
Sure, you have to.
So for you, the listener, this isn't just about a regional quirk. It suggests that actively seeking the potential in your early ideas rather than immediately dismissing them could be a game changer.
That fundamental shift from skepticism to actively seeking possibilities is a really powerful insight.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it suggests that our natural inclination to find flaws might actually be hindering progress, particularly in those very early, vulnerable stages when an idea is still taking shape.
And the fact that this glass half full approach in Silicon Valley appears to correlate with companies actually generating revenue, well, that's pretty strong evidence that this mindset might be genuinely effective.
It suggests it works, yeah.
It makes you wonder if this more encouraging way of looking at new things could and should become more widely adopted.
It certainly raises an important question about how our individual and societal attitudes influence innovation. But the source also points out that simple inexperience isn't the only factor that leads to harsh judgment of early-stage ideas.
Ah, right. There's more to it.
There can be other, perhaps less admirable motivations at play.
Yes. There's the idea that some people might be quick to criticize new ideas simply to try and appear smart or insightful.
Right, like posturing.
It's almost a way to establish themselves as being very discerning.
Precisely. And then there's the more uncomfortable truth, the underlying fear that if someone else's ambitious project actually succeeds, it might somehow diminish one's own accomplishments or standing.
Oh, yeah.
The material even hints that in certain cultures, this kind of dynamic might be more prevalent.
It's fascinating to contrast that with the kind of self-interest that seems to foster a more supportive environment in places like Silicon Valley. Well, there, people often hope for others' success, whether they're investors looking for a return, individuals wanting to build their network, or even just wanting to say, I knew them when, later on.
Right, there's potential upside for everyone. And even if it starts from a place of self-interest, the source makes a really insightful point.
Yeah.
Over time, this encouragement can actually solidify into a genuine cultural norm, almost an automatic response within that community.
It just becomes the way things are done.
Exactly.
So we've talked about why other people might be overly critical of work that's just starting out, but the text also shifts to something that probably resonates even more deeply, our own internal skepticism.
Ah, the inner critic.
We are often our own toughest audience, judging our own fledgling ideas with that same unnerving eye, so we see how external factors can make it tough on new ideas.
Yeah.
But, as you know from your own experience, that internal critic can be even louder. Let's dive into how we can manage that self-doubt.
And this is a really crucial point for you, the listener. It's not just about navigating external judgment. It's about taming that internal voice of doubt that can stop you from even letting your ideas take shape in the first place. The text wisely points out that we don't want to silence that critical voice entirely because it does play a vital role in driving quality and refinement later on.
Right. It's not about turning off your ability to think critically.
Not at all.
It's more about finding a way to temporarily dial it down, like taking a painkiller to get you through a particularly difficult initial phase.
Exactly, like a temporary mute button.
So what are some of the concrete strategies for managing that inner critic?
Well, one intriguing suggestion comes from the mathematician Hardy, who proposed that slightly overestimating the significance of your work can actually counteract our natural tendency to underestimate our initial results.
Huh. Inflate its importance a bit.
Kind of. Think of it like this. You might initially think your work is only going to be a small contribution, but by intentionally overestimating its potential impact, you compensate for your own tendency to be too critical.
Okay.
Even if your initial assessment of its size is off, you're more likely to give it the effort it deserves.
That idea of intentionally inflating the perceived importance, it's like giving your early efforts a bit of a head start in your own mind.
Exactly. Another related technique is cultivating a touch of overconfidence.
Really? Overconfident?
Well, slight overconfidence. The text suggests that many successful individuals exhibit a slight overestimation of their own abilities. And while it might seem paradoxical, this can act as a protective layer, shielding you not only from your own doubts, but also from some of the external skepticism you might encounter.
It's like having a bit of extra resilience built in when you're venturing into unknown territory.
Precisely. A buffer.
The text also touches briefly on this idea of strategic ignorance, especially for younger individuals, suggesting that being less critical of finished work might somehow make it easier to be less critical of early work. Though it does acknowledge that this isn't necessarily a skill you can actively develop.
Yeah, that seems more like an interesting observation than a practical technique. But the next point is definitely something you can actively work on. Surrounding yourself with the right people.
Ah, the community aspect.
Yes. The source emphasizes how crucial it is to have colleagues who can distinguish between an ugly duckling idea that has real potential and something that genuinely isn't viable.
People who get it.
Exactly. Think of it as a protected space, like a calm pocket in a strong wind. Your supportive colleagues create this environment where your early ideas can be nurtured without being blown away by harsh criticism.
And it highlights that the ideal people for this are often those who are working on similar projects themselves.
Right.
That makes perfect sense because they understand the messy reality of early stage development and can see the potential for growth through their own experiences.
They've been there.
This really underscores the value of university departments, research labs, and even just proactively connecting with others in your field.
Precisely. And then there's the special role that good teachers can play.
Mentors.
Yeah, a truly effective teacher has the ability to see the promise in early unpolished work and provide the crucial encouragement needed to keep going.
That's huge.
The text notes that these kinds of mentors can be somewhat rare, so if you're fortunate enough to find one, it's incredibly important to seize that opportunity to learn from them.
Then there's the suggestion to shift your focus from the current state of your work to the rate at which it's improving.
The velocity, yeah.
If you can see tangible progress, even if the end result still feels distant, it can be much less discouraging.
Absolutely. Momentum is key.
And this really highlights the benefit of dedicating focused time to a new project right at the beginning. That initial burst of effort can often lead to rapid and noticeable gains.
That emphasis on momentum, rather than immediate perfection, can be a powerful motivator. And then there's a really clever tactic, framing new work initially as a less demanding type of task.
How does that work?
By starting with the mindset of creating a sketch or a quick hack, you automatically lower the bar for your initial self-judgment.
Lower the stakes. It's like giving yourself permission to create something rough and imperfect as a starting point,
Exactly.
with the understanding that you can always refine and elevate it later.
Right. This also connects to the idea of choosing mediums that allow for quick iteration and feedback, like sketching in a notebook compared to sculpting in stone or working digitally versus physically.
So you get feedback faster.
Yeah, you get those initial results much faster, which can be really encouraging and help maintain momentum. John Carmack's experience with game mods in the early days of Quake is a perfect example of this.
Oh, right.
The platform allowed for rapid experimentation and iteration, significantly reducing the lag between the initial concept and something playable, even if it was crude.
Yeah, lowers the barrier.
It lowers the stakes and really encourages that initial exploration.
Another really insightful perspective comes from Lisa Randall, who suggests treating new projects as experiments.
The scientist's mindset.
Right. This fundamentally reframes failure as simply an opportunity to learn something valuable.
Okay.
If something definitively doesn't work, you move on with new knowledge. If it shows even a glimmer of potential for improvement, you iterate and refine.
That experimental mindset really takes away the heavy pressure of immediate success. It fosters a spirit of exploration and discovery,
Yeah.
where setbacks are seen as data points rather than definitive judgments on your ability.
And finally, there's the simple but powerful motivator of pure curiosity.
Just wanting to see what happens.
Pretty much. The text mentions that pursuing new things just to see what the outcome will be can be a surprisingly strong driving force, referencing the origins of Y Combinator and the initial motivation behind working on the Bell programming language.
That intrinsic motivation, that genuine interest in the journey and the potential result, can often be enough to override that initial fear of not being good enough right away.
It shifts the focus.
Yeah, shifts the focus from self-evaluation to the sheer excitement of discovery.
So after exploring all these different angles, the material really brings it back to this core idea that the seemingly lame early version of an ambitious project actually holds significantly more value than we tend to believe.
Right, it's not actually lame.
All these mental strategies we've been discussing are essentially ways to bring our perception in line with that reality.
And that's a key takeaway for you, the listener. Those initial steps, even if they feel clumsy or unimpressive, are absolutely essential.
I couldn't agree more.
They are the foundation upon which something truly remarkable can be built.
To really let this sink in, the text suggests looking into the early histories of people who've achieved great things.
Do some digging.
Yeah. What were their initial thoughts? What did their very first attempts look like? It acknowledges that this information can sometimes be hard to come by because creators might feel a bit embarrassed by those early, less polished stages.
Sure, who wants to show their beauty pictures?
Mm.
But Michael Nielsen's point about the internet making early work more accessible, things like initial code commits on open source projects or early videos uploaded to platforms, is really valuable.
That's true. It's out there more now.
It gives us a window into those often humble beginnings of truly significant achievements.
The idea is that by actively seeking out and studying these examples, we can train ourselves to become better judges of early stage work, both our own and the work of others.
Calibrate our judgment.
Exactly. We start to recognize those initial efforts for what they truly are, the necessary first steps on a much longer and potentially very rewarding journey.
And the piece concludes with a really thought-provoking idea that our very ways of judging early work are themselves a work in progress, a version 1.0 that is constantly evolving.
Huh. Our attitudes are version 1.0.
Yeah. The increasing adoption of more encouraging and nuanced perspectives signals a really significant and positive shift. It shows we're learning.
So the crucial takeaway for you today is this. That fear of making something lame is incredibly common, but it is so often a misleading obstacle.
It really is.
By understanding where this fear originates and by actively using some of the strategies we've talked about, from consciously overestimating your work's potential to focusing on your rate of improvement and surrounding yourself with a supportive community, you can learn to navigate that initial phase of any new endeavor much more effectively.
And as you move forward with your own projects and ideas, we want to leave you with this to consider. Think back to a time when you hesitated to start something new, specifically because of this fear of it not being good enough initially. Knowing what you now know, how might you approach that very same project if you were to start it today?
That's a great question. And we really encourage you to seek out examples of great work in the areas that interest you most and try to uncover how those projects began.
Find those lane beginnings.
You'll likely find that those seemingly lame first steps are almost always a fundamental part of the journey to something truly extraordinary.